Don't miss London Real. Subscribe now. This week on London Real, we have American investor and author Jim ROGERS.
Who's going to make the money? Who is making the money? Who's got the money? Who wants the money? If you can follow the money, if you can figure out how the money is, what's happening, then you'll figure out a lot of the real stuff that's going on. Because politicians do foolish things, and the next thing you know, a bunch of 20-year-olds are shooting each other. We still get panicked when things go bad. We still get hysterical when things are going right. I will say to you that I know many people who'd rather do business in China than in the U.S. I would like to invest in North Korea, but I'm an American, so it's illegal. If you can only visit one country in your life, you should visit India. If I get an investment idea from somebody else, I nearly always lose money. There's a hidden agenda everywhere, and you got to figure that out. No matter what you think is true today, it's not going to be the case in 15 years.
London Real presents Jim ROGERS. Follow the money.
I am a citizen of the land of the free, and we're not allowed.
Welcome back to London Real. I'm coming at you from the Box Park here in Shoreditch. I've got the T building behind me, which if you're in tech, you're probably up in there. We got the overground here, Shoreditch High Street Station, and it's all good. There's a little bit of an accordion playing behind me. It's Friday afternoon, so it's gonna get funky here pretty soon at the Box Park behind me. This will be filled up with some crazy youth getting their drink on. But this week, we have an interesting gentleman on the show. I call this the continuation of my Grumpy Old Man series, which recently featured Mr. Dan Pena, the guy who's the author of Your First 100 Million, who has a castle in Scotland. Some of the other noteworthy grumpy old men on London Real have included Jacques Fresco, 96-year-olds, who talked about the Venus Project, and I think even Mr. Peter Schiff might be part of the grumpy old man section of London Real, as he talked about finance and the market crash of 2014. And now I bring you Mr. Jim ROGERS, who is a man who grew up in Alabama, who sports a seersucker suit. If you're not familiar with that, it's a very old school South thing to wear. It's kind of a light blue striping print, and it's something only the old school wears. And Jim is truly old school. This guy has been doing this back in the day. He actually co-founded the Quantum Fund with Mr. George Soros in 1973. That fund has since returned over $32 billion to investors. And it was a fund before the word hedge fund was even used. And I asked him about it briefly. Sounds like he doesn't own any of it anymore because he quickly didn't want to talk about the Quantum Fund or George Soros. But you know, that's okay, respect. Jim has been investing for so long and was part of the Wall Street scene back in the late 60s and 70s, you know, before it was the rock star thing to do, you know, before everybody was making it rich when they were young, before people like me got involved back in the 90s and the 80s. He was doing it kind of old school, and he, funny enough, retired by the age he was 37, and wrote a book called Investment Biker. And he rode his motorcycle across China before China was cool. And he did that when there was really no roads, like back in 1990, 1992. And he wrote a book about it. And when I started on Wall Street in 93, people were talking about it. They're like, yeah, there's this guy, he wrote this book called Investment Biker, and you got to check him out. It's Jim ROGERS. So it was quite a treasure to have him on the show. You know, since then, he's been a real proponent now of agriculture and commodities, and he thinks that farmers will be driving the Lamborghinis in the future. I can't say I agree with him. but he does have a point there when it comes to commodities and agriculture. There could be a comeback. He's also a big fan of investing in Russia. He wants to put all of his money into North Korea. Yes, I said it, North Korea. And he's got some other kind of controversial investment ideas. And I think you're going to really enjoy him drop science about the industry as a whole. And you know, I didn't expect that you guys would like the Grumpy Old Man series, but you guys love them. And I don't know what that says about you or me, but the response to Dan Pena has been fabulous. Everybody seems to really like that guy, and people love Peter Schiff, over 300,000 views. So I'm trying to listen to you guys and bring in some of these financial experts. I think everybody likes to hear a little bit about their money and how to invest it and what's going on, in addition with a few psychedelics thrown in, a few fighters, and hopefully some new things we're going to be doing in the future. So I appreciate that feedback, and yes, I am listening. I don't always listen, but this time I am. And on that same note, make sure you check out our other show called Silicon Reel, about to hit 50 episodes. I can't believe it. And the response has been fantastic. The people we're getting on the show are pretty much tier one technology startup people here in London and from around the world. So it's a fabulous watch. It's a lot of fun. It's got like a London Reel vibe, and you can find that at siliconreel.com. Now, speaking of the Grumpy Old Man series, if you want to search by episode on our website, you can go to episodes and click on success. You can click on MMA. You can click on psychedelics. You can click on activism. And that's thanks to the folks at Squarespace. If you don't know what Squarespace is, they're an all-in-one platform that makes it super easy to create your own website, your own online portfolio. When I blog and when I put my episodes up, it's literally drag and drop. You can actually go right now, click on this logo below, and you can design your website for free without even paying. And if you do want to actually make it go live, it's for as little as like $8 a month. It's like a joke. It's like a tiny, tiny amount of money to have an online presence, which is crucial these days. And they have all sorts of other features. They'll help you create a logo. They just do everything great over there. So we're big fans of those guys. And next week, funny enough, we're going to be doing a contest. We'll be giving a 1-year free subscription, a business level subscription to Squarespace. So it's time for you to tune in. Next week we're having Mr. Ryan Holiday with us, the guy who's the author of Trust Me, I'm Lying, Confessions of a Media Manipulator. And Ryan worked for Tucker Max. He worked for Tim Ferriss. He's the marketing director of American Apparel with Dov Charney. He slept on Robert Greene's floor and helped him out with the book Mastery. It's pretty impressive stuff. So tune in for Ryan and tune in to get that free subscription for Squarespace. But in the meantime, if you click on the link below, and if you want to buy, use the code London, and you'll get 10% off. And let them know that you're watching this show and watching them. And that's it for the guys at Squarespace. And if you haven't been informed about the proper way to drink your coffee, then you might want to look into the guys at Bulletproof. Yes, it's the coffee I serve on the show. Although Jim didn't have any, he was in a rush that day. But it's the coffee I drink every morning, and it's very simple. It's a coffee that's free of molds and toxins. I mix it up with some grass-fed butter and some MCT oil, which is a brain octane oil they make, which is basically the best of the coconut oil. And you have that in kind of a frothy brew every morning, and it's just a fantastic way to start your day. They're also big into sleep hacking. I got a video that you can watch that's got 2 free apps, 5 free tips to help you sleep better. I'm a big fan of the sleep, man. Get your 8 hours, 7 hours. It'll make you so much more productive. And just get involved. These guys are great. They have a great podcast called Bulletproof Radio that I was on a few weeks ago, so you can watch that episode with me talking to Dave Asprey if you like. And there you go. I'm loving this new Nike campaign behind me. It must be some crazy device, but they're littering Shoreditch around here with all of their ads and keeping the whole place fresh. So there you go. I'm going to keep this one short. Leave you next to the Shoreditch High Street. If you do want to help out with us, I'm getting crazy amounts of interest and support. Send me a message at brian@londonreal.tv. You can tweet at us. You can post something on our Facebook wall. Help book me a guest. Get involved with the show. Get involved with Silicon Reel. Send us something at hello@siliconreel.com. And it's all good there. Now I'm going to leave you with Mr. Jim Rogers, who's an American investor and author and all-around Southern gentleman. Enjoy. Okay, here we go. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Mr. Jim Rogers, who is an American businessman, investor, and author. You're currently based in Singapore. You went from Yale to Wall Street in 1964 and later co-founded the Quantum Fund with George Soros in 1973, where I think in 10 years you guys had returned something like 4,200% compared with the S&P at, say, 47. That's a lot. If you're not in the finance world, it's pretty much a legendary fund. What you guys did there. I think it returned something like $32 billion before they closed it down to its original investors. So
I've been gone since 1980, so I left 34 years ago.
Right, you probably don't remember those numbers.
Just one slight correction. I didn't go from Yale to Wall Street. I went from Yale to Oxford, and then
to Wall Street. Right? Oxford in '66,
and then the Army, and then Wall Street.
Okay, I want to get your thoughts on England back in '66, but I'll just finish your introduction. You motorcycled over 100,000 miles through China and the rest of the world in the early '90s, and later wrote the bestseller Investment Biker, which I first heard about when I started Wall Street. I'll tell you about that later. About 10 years later, you made a similar trip. This time in a Mercedes, but you went through 116 countries, 250,000 kilometers. And a great looking car. It was yellow. It was fantastic. You now manage, I believe it's a commodities equities index fund. Is that right?
I don't. I have a commodities index, but I don't manage any funds. I license it to other people, and they have funds.
Understood. I know you are quite bullish on agriculture. You've recently said the farmers are going to be driving the Lamborghinis, and the stockbrokers are going to be driving the tractors. Jim, thanks so much for being here, and welcome to London Real.
I am delighted to be here, Ryan.
You know, I started my Wall Street career in '93. I worked for Bankers Trust. I was a fixed income derivatives trader. And I remember hearing about your book. I started in '93. It must have just come out in '94.
It just came out, yes.
And I saw a picture of the cover. Your hair is a slightly darker color. It was a while back, but it was kind of legendary in the trading community. A lot of people were talking about it because I don't think there were that many people going on these crazy adventures that had been in the business. And I was wondering if you could tell me, what do you learn on the back of a motorcycle that you can't learn, say, reading a balance sheet or watching CNN?
You're not going to learn much watching TV, I assure you, no matter what the program. Well, you see the world from the ground up. There's no question. You see what's actually happening, not what journalists are saying, not what writers are saying. When you're close to the ground, you see a whole different world. You see whether a country is being organized properly, whether there's a black market, whether it's corrupt. You see everything there is to see. It's not secondhand when you drive around the world, either by motorcycle or by car.
I'm actually reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance now, and he talks about how even on a motorcycle, you're forced to really deal with the weather, and you feel it more than even in a car where it can seem a bit like a television channel.
Yeah, when you're in a car, you're in a box.
Right.
It certainly is a television show. You might as well be at home watching it on TV if you're in a car or a truck or something. If you're in a motorcycle, you're right out there in it. You're part of it, which is exhilarating and exciting and very, very, it's a wonderful way to travel and live. It's a great adventure. That's why I loved motorcycles so much. And that's why I wanted to go around the world on a motorcycle, because I knew I would see it all, which I could never see any other way.
Right. And you were one, I mean, so many people went into China early. So many people got burned on China early. People tried to understand it later, had a hard time even trying to refigure it out again. What's your relationship been like with China? Was that the first time you were there? Was driving your bike through there?
No, I first went to China in 1984. I went to China in 1984 to get permission to ride my motorcycle across China.
Okay.
They actually sort of thought I was a little nuts to even come an American capitalist to Red China in 1984 to say, could I ride my motorcycle across China? And they, of course, said no. First of all, they said there's no road. And they were right. I now know they were right. There was just a gigantic desert. But I went around to various parts of China and asked more people. In 1986, they let me drive around one province on a motorcycle. Then they said, yeah, you can do it. And Channel 4 in the UK and PBS in America and Channel 7 in Australia decided to make a movie of it for TV. And so we had to delay it for a year because they got ready. But off I went in 1988 and rode across China.
And why China? You could have gone anywhere else in the world to tour. Why there?
Well, my plan, my hope was to drive around the world. But if you remember the 1980s, China was Red China. You know, the idea that you could ride across China was absurd. Likewise, the Soviet Union was the Soviet Union. So my plan was to drive across China and then get permission from Russia, the Soviet Union, and then go around the world. I mean, I look back on it, I must have been insane. I didn't have a clue what I was talking about or thinking about. But it all worked. I got permission to ride across China. We made the film, and then the Russians said, yeah, you can ride across the Soviet Union too. So it all, and then I went around the world. That was the original plan. It took several years to implement it because of the Cold War and all the things, the geopolitics that were taking place at the time. I didn't want to be somebody who said, yeah, I drove around the world. And they said, what, you drove across Europe, you went to Australia, you rode across the US? That's not, to me, that wasn't going around the world.
Right.
I mean, I had to do the world if I was going to do the world. So it took a few years to get permission to do it properly.
Do you ever have to explain to your daughters what it was really like back then when the Soviet Union was around and China was Red China? Because they probably don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, if I try to explain it, they're too young to even conceive of what I'm talking about.
It almost sounds Orwellian when you try to describe it to someone.
Orwellian wouldn't work with them. They're too young.
Right.
They're still too young.
They wouldn't know what that meant, you know. So you live in Singapore now. There was a quote from you that you said, if you were smart in 1807, you moved to London. If you were smart in 1907, you moved to New York City. And if you're smart in 2007, you moved to Asia.
Right, and I did.
And you did. Well,
Yes.
and why Asia? And why now?
Well, in my mind, there's a little question that Asia is going to be the 21st century, will be the century of Asia, whether we like it or not. And there's certainly a lot of people who don't like it. You know, America's the largest debtor nation in world history. The debts are going higher and higher. I mean, you can look out the window and see some more great debtors nearby, and they're all getting worse and worse. The assets are in Asia. China, the largest creditor nations in the world are China, Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore. I mean, that's where the assets are. That's where the drive is, the ambition. That's where people work hard. I mean, throughout history, there have been countries and continents which have risen and fallen. This is the Asian century, whether we like it or not. There'll be plenty of setbacks in Asia, just as there were in America as we rose, just as there were in the UK as the UK rose. But I don't see any options but Asia, and I want to prepare my children for the 21st century. I want to give them any legs up that I can. It's not going to make them successful because they know Asia, because they can speak Mandarin, but it's going to give them a few advantages that they may or may not squander, but we'll see.
And did you want them surrounded in that kind of Asian work ethic, not to mention the language, just to see what it was like?
Oh yes, I certainly did, and I wanted them to have Asian education. As you probably know, the Asian nations come out on top in all the education, the international education test. The United States is not even in the top 20. So I wanted them to have the demanding, rigorous, advanced education. I didn't know what I was saying. I got to tell you, it's unbelievably demanding, rigorous, and advanced. It's much more than I expected. And sometimes I feel sorry for my daughters had more homework in 2 or 3 years than I had in 12 in the U.S. I see what they're doing. I mean, I can see why the Asians come out on top in the test. Will my daughter be better for it? I don't know, but she's certainly learning. Certainly learning a work ethic, if nothing else.
You know, there was that book written called Tiger Mother, I think, about that. I think it was an Asian Chinese mother in America married to an American, and she was talking about how she raised her children, you know, with lots of homework, demanding a lot of them, no gold stars for showing up.
Right.
Is that the kind of thing you see with your daughters?
Yes, it's astonishing. I cannot tell you how rigorous and demanding. And this is Singapore. Now, Singapore always comes out in the top 5, but so does China, the Chinese that I know. So it's just like, I mean, Singapore copied China, or China copied Singapore, you know, and Korea. All the Asian, not all, but certainly the Chinese Asian nations are this way. Well, the Japanese are the same, the Koreans are the same. No, it's in their genes.
And you said that used to be America and Europe, was the people that worked hard, right? And the people that were motivated and driven. You know, the immigration wave you talked about in the last century or two to America.
In the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, we were flooded with immigrants who would do anything to come there and work there. They showed up with no money and became great successes, and even into the 20th century. This was what made America great. We were a nation of immigrants. The American government gave people money to come to America, gave them land to come to America. Not they didn't give them money, they gave them land to come to America. And a lot of people got on the boat. Can you imagine getting on a boat 150 years ago? You didn't know anybody. The boat may sink. There's a good chance the boat will sink. You got there, you didn't know what to do. And then many of them just got a horse and a wagon and went out into the wilderness. I mean, when they went to the wilderness, there was no McDonald's out there. There was no Coca-Cola. There was no running, no shops. There was nothing. They were on their own. And yet a lot of people did it, and you know the rest of the story.
Yeah. There's a tenement museum in New York City where you can go visit the tenements, and you can see the stories of some of these Italian immigrants, Russian immigrants that would come over. And yeah, I mean, some of them never went home. I mean, some of them never had contact with their families ever again.
No, I'm fully aware of that. Yes. I had a forebear who showed up. We don't know where he is. Have no idea. He was from Germany, and who knows what happened to him.
And is there any way for America to get this fire back or get this back? Or is it kind of an emerging issue? If you're not the emerging economy, you're not going to be hungry, you're not going to be the underdog. Or is there a way, I mean, America's education system's shocking. And
I know.
Is there a way to get it back?
Well, no country in history that's gotten itself into this kind of situation has gotten out without a crisis or a semi-crisis. No country's ever said, okay, we've got a disaster on our hands. Let's start over and do it right. No, they're always forced to change, and usually when they change, it causes great collapse, and nobody really starts over the way they should. I don't know no country in history that's done it that way. It's always led to serious decline. I mean, yes, it's wonderful living in the UK right now, but what the UK was 100 years ago, 150 years ago, I don't think you're ever going to see that UK again.
It's hard to fathom. I took a tour of the Tower Bridge in London, famous bridge from 120 years ago, and it used to have a pressurized water hydraulic system that would raise the gate, and it was highly complex the way the Victorians designed it. It was top-notch engineering for that time. And the guy showed me in the corner, all of it had been replaced by a German motor. And the symbolism was shocking.
Yeah. You just said it all. And I mean, as much as I love the UK, and I've had some of my triumphs in the UK, I mean, it's not what it used to be, as much as I wish it were.
I watched the movie Gandhi the other day just on a whim, and it had been a long time since I saw it, and it was just fascinating to just kind of get walked through that entire subcontinent that is India. And I was just wondering if you could give us your takes on India. A lot of people compare it to China because of the populations, but it's a completely different animal with infrastructure that doesn't compare. And I was wondering if you could walk people through what is India in your opinion?
Well, if you can only visit one country in your life, you should visit India, because there's no country that has the breadth and depth of culture and man-made sites and natural sites. I mean, the food, the languages, the religions. India is a constant sensory feast. The women are always winning the beauty contest. I mean, some great, brilliant entrepreneurs that have come out of India, men and women. No, it's astonishing. But boy, as a place to do business or even to live, it's a nightmare. I mean, there's little infrastructure. Education is hopeless. Fewer than half of Indians stay in school till they're 12 years old. No, it's a wonderful country to visit. But boy, unless you're in bed or in cahoots with the right people, it's very difficult to be successful in India. Certainly for an outsider.
Right, I was about to say, is there any way for an outsider to really invest in India, or do you need to really be an insider?
Well, it's easier to be an insider in India. It's easier to be an insider everywhere. But there are cases in America, in the UK, where outsiders have come in and have become very successful. Not many that I know of in India where that's the case. Not in India as it presently is constructed. There's a new governor, a new government. He says there are a lot of the right things. My problem with India is I've heard these right things said by politicians for decades, and none of them come true. Now, India's had some great periods in its history, there's no question, but even that India was not the India which exists on a map today. The India which exists today was pushed together by the British in 1947 in panic as they were trying to get out of there. So this India has never existed. Will it continue to exist as it does now? I doubt it. It certainly hasn't historically. I love visiting there, but it's a tough place to live or do business.
Have you tried doing business in the past there or investing in there?
I have invested there on the short side. I've actually invested on the long side a couple of times in India. Yes, I've never tried to do, I don't try to do business anywhere. I'm more of a markets person than a company person.
Okay, back to Asia. You live in Singapore. You've seen China kind of growing and making a few, pseudo-military moves on some islands in some of the South China Sea, and you see them kind of flexing their muscles a bit on a political stage. I was wondering, where do you think that's going in the next 20, 30, 40 years? Is that even in their interests, or should they keep doing what they do great right now, which is making products for the world?
To me, it's astonishing that the world may come to an end over a few rocks in the ocean, but having said that, if you go back and look at how most wars have started, they've always been absurd.
Like tiny little incidents, right?
Yeah, little incident, one incident, and then this guy does that, and that guy does that, and the next thing you know, First World War is a perfect example. Right. 6 months later, they were all saying, how do we get into this? How do we get out of this? But unfortunately, they couldn't, for whatever reason, because of one little incident, and the next thing you knew, hundreds of thousands of people were dead, vast amounts of capital were squandered. That was a gigantic waste. But it was all because of a few foolish little things that got everybody going. But all wars, when you go back and look at them, get started that way, because politicians do foolish things, and the next thing you know, a bunch of 20-year-olds are shooting each other.
How does the U.S. maintain this relationship where their biggest creditor is, say, China? China's producing all of the goods for the U.S. You've got Japan in the region. You don't want people fighting to continue the economy growing, but you've got a lot of conflicting interests here. How does the U.S. manage that?
Well, we will see. So far, badly. Well, I shouldn't say badly because it's worked so far. I mean, we're not at war, and we've got all this credit that we keep getting from other people, and we keep going about our business as though we don't have big credit. We don't have big debts. You can ask me in 5 years or 10 years how it's all going to come out. America's not changed its conduct. Well, maybe it's changed its conduct a little bit, but virtually not at all, despite the fact that we're the largest debtor nation in world history.
And what sectors in China are you bullish on for the future?
Well, the Chinese say that they had a big meeting in November of 2013 in Beijing, and they say it's one of the three most important economic events in China in the past 35 years. The first was when Deng Xiaoping in 1978 said, this didn't work. We got to try something new. And in 1993, they said, okay, now we got to engage the outside world more. Well, both of those changes led to staggering changes in the world, not just in China. And now they said, all right, the next 20 years, this is where we're going to put our money and our efforts and our incentives. Well, if the Chinese government is going to spend a lot of money on some sectors of their economy, I am too, because they got more money than I do. They're smarter than I am, more successful than I am. So certainly things will come of it, and all you got to do is get out the list. So it's public information. I don't have any inside information here. They've told you we're going to spend a lot of money. Well, one thing they did say, they said we're going to, if there's a question, we'll let the market decide how things should evolve. It's in sharp contrast to the U.S. and the UK and other places where they say, no, the government is smarter than the market. We don't want the market to decide because we're smarter than the market. Well, the Chinese, Red China, has said we're going to let the market decide. And they're already letting people go bankrupt, which in the West we hardly let anybody go bankrupt. Healthcare, they say we're going to open up to the market. Railroads, they've said. Agriculture, they've said all the places that you can get out the list. Finance, they're going to open up finance. They said these are the things where there will be dramatic changes in the next 20 years. Get out the list, they're right there.
Which is hard to believe because it's known as the communist country where things are decided by government. But you're saying it's actually more free market than, say, healthcare in America.
I will say to you that I know many people who'd rather do business in China than in the U.S. Yes, because in the U.S., especially some of the states like California in the U.S., it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare in many ways to do business. And so many people would prefer to do business in China than in many states in the U.S. I mean, I hate saying this. I'm an American citizen and taxpayer, but unfortunately, facts are facts.
Yeah, those two go together pretty much, right? Unless you renounce.
Right.
I'm both of those as well. So, and you must get asked advice all the time about doing business in China. Is there things that you tell people, a few simple steps of things to watch or not, or has that changed probably in the last 5 years?
Well, it depends on how much you know. If you cannot speak the language and you don't know the difference in Shanghai and Beijing, you better get a partner. You better get a Chinese partner who will help you, a trustworthy, reliable Chinese partner. But if you know a lot about it, you probably know better than I do what you should be doing in China. You will find the opportunities. There are 1,300,000,000 Chinese. I mean, no matter what you are expert in, whether if you know how to make towels, I promise you there's a market in China for towels, no matter what it is you're good at. They need it. It's a rapidly growing economy, yes, but there's still every opportunity you can think of if you're good at something.
You know, you've been talking a lot lately about commodities and agriculture, something that you're very bullish on. My grandfather was a farmer in Colorado and Arizona. He grew barley for Coors Brewing Company, funny enough, and grew potatoes as well. And he was one of those guys that you mentioned where early on in the U.S., they would just give you land if you went west.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they needed people just to go. And it was the Wild West, you know.
Well, they wanted people first to come to America.
Right.
And then they wanted them to go west.
Right.
And they gave a lot away.
And why is that a sector that you see a lot of growth and you're bullish on? I mean, you're talking about farmers driving Lamborghinis. You know, I'm an ex-banker myself, and I would have never expected to see the flip side of that. So what do you mean by that when you say that?
Well, first of all, agriculture has been a terrible business for 30 years. It's been so bad that the world has now consumed more than it's produced for the last decade. And when you consume more than you produce, it's got to come from inventory. We built up big inventories over those 30 years, but now the inventories worldwide are near historic lows. So we're running out of food. Worse than that, we're running out of farmers. But the average age of farmers in America is 58.
That old?
In Japan, it's 66. In Canada, it's the oldest in recorded history. Australia, it's 58. The highest rate of suicide in the UK is in agriculture. You know, millions or lots of Indian farmers have committed suicide in the past. It's a terrible business.
The pay is near poverty level as well,
For
right?
many reasons, it's been a terrible business.
Okay.
At the same time, we don't have any new people. Young people are not becoming farmers. You know, more people in America study public relations than study agriculture. I mean, we got the old people dying and getting out of the business. No young people coming in. What more do you need to know? Unless the price of agricultural goods and profits in agriculture go much higher, there's not going to be any food at any price. Somebody has to go into the fields. Even when the fields are automated, somebody's got to do it. And if everybody's dead and everybody's studying public relations, where's the food going to come from?
And will this be dominated by companies like Cargill and those huge conglomerates that they kind of run the food business? I think last time that I saw a documentary about buying like bacon in the U.S. that it's all supplied by basically 3 companies that do the majority of that.
Well, there are certainly going to be big companies and successful companies, but the U.S. is not the only producer of food in the world. It may astonish some people to know that. There are vast numbers of farmers in agricultural areas around the world. Some companies will get bigger and more successful, but also there's plenty of opportunity for entrepreneurs and people starting out.
Okay. Russia. What is your call on Russia? Obviously, it's been pretty exciting lately with the things happening in the Crimea Peninsula, in Ukraine. You know, we kind of see, you know, you mentioned the Cold War earlier. We kind of see Russia kind of getting back to where it needs these buffer zones around it. There's a lot of things on the line. There's oil and gas. There's, you know, global politics involved with the U.S. What's your read on what's happening there?
Well, I first went to Russia in 1966. And came away pessimistic on the Soviet Union, and was pessimistic for the next 46 years. But I have begun becoming more optimistic about Russia, not the former Soviet Union, because Ukraine's a disaster and will be, and many of the other socialist states are not going to be successful. But I've become optimistic about Russia. I've started investing in Russia. Russia's probably the most hated second most hated stock market in the world. Argentina may be more hated. But it's got vast natural resources, vast financial resources. It's got a freely convertible currency. I've started investing in Russia because I see what I think is change that's available at a cheap price.
And what didn't you like in '66? Were you at Oxford here and you took a trip over there?
I just finished Oxford, and the summer after graduating from Oxford, I took a trip to East Germany, to Poland, Czechoslovakia, Ukraine, Russia. Yeah, we did several socialist states.
That's before the Prague uprising in '68, where things started getting really dicey.
Yeah, this was early on. Yes,
okay.
yes.
What was it like? I'm just curious. What do you remember seeing?
What I remember seeing was nothing. They didn't have anything.
They hadn't built up since the wars, or
no. I mean, listen, communism can ruin anything. Communism certainly ruined Russia. But I mean, when I came to the UK in '64, there were still bomb sites.
Right.
I mean, the UK was devastated, and you didn't even have a battle. There was no battlefield here, but the UK was in serious trouble, and it was 20 years after the war had ended. They still had not recovered very much.
Yeah, I had Jared Diamond here who wrote the book Guns, Germs, and Steel, and he was also at Oxford, I think around the same time you were, and he was trying to explain to me that a lot of homes were still lit by candlelight, there still wasn't a lot of food supplies, and like you said, there wasn't even a battleground here, and that's 20 years after World War II. It devastated the British and European economies, didn't it?
Certainly, well, of course, if you were in Italy or Germany, you were certainly France, you were devastated, but the UK, which in 1918 was still the richest, most powerful country in the world. 3 generations later, they were ruined. Even 1 generation later, they were in serious trouble. And this country was a mess when I was here in the 60s, even into the 70s. It was a horrible mess. And they never quite, well, they certainly didn't recover for 20 or 30 years because, as I say, there were bomb sites here where they'd been bombed in 1944. They'd never been able to rebuild it or just clean up the debris. No, when I went to Oxford, I mean, there was only 1 shower. I mean, it was, looking back on it, it was somewhat primitive, certainly, compared to where I went to university in the States.
Why did you come over here and go to Oxford?
Well, I wanted to avoid the draft for one reason.
That's a good reason.
It didn't work. The secret reason was that there was something here called the Oxford and Cambridge boat race. And I very much wanted to be, I had delusions of grandeur.
Okay.
I wanted to be in the Oxford and Cambridge boat race.
Did you row at Yale?
I coxed at Yale.
Okay.
And when I got here, I found out, gosh, this is crazy. This is absurd to try to get into the Oxford-Cambridge boat race. But I did. I got into the Oxford-Cambridge boat race and had a wonderful, wonderful time. But that's why I wanted to go. Well, also I wanted to have experience outside of the U.S. I had learned. Grew up in the backwoods of Alabama, and I had learned that the dramatic education of going far away from home to school, that's the best part of education. So going from the backwoods of Alabama to Yale was mind-boggling, opened me up to a lot of stuff. And I knew that if I studied abroad, I would have the same kind of experience. Rudyard Kipling once wrote a poem called The English Flag. And in there's a line which said, "What can he know of England who only England knows?" Well, I knew that. I knew that if you left Alabama, you'd know a lot more about Alabama. I also knew if you left America, you'd know a lot more about America by going somewhere else. You can go back or not go back, depends on what you want, but at least you're going to learn a lot. So I very much wanted that experience of studying outside the United States. I wanted to avoid the draft. I wanted to be in the Oxford-Cambridge boat race. So off I went. I got a scholarship from Yale, and off I went.
Did you manage to avoid the draft or not?
No, I was in the United States Army. I spent 2 years. I came back from Oxford. I was in the Army for 2 years.
Okay. You were born in Baltimore.
Yes.
You grew up in Alabama.
Yes.
You're the first guest ever on the show to wear a seersucker suit. Looks beautiful.
Thanks.
A lot of people over here don't understand the South or Southern charm or don't understand a lot of basics because they've never visited. Again, like you said, what do you know of England if you haven't left? What is the South really like, or how do you describe it to foreigners who've never been there?
Well, I'm not sure there is a South anymore, given that the world has changed so much and that television has leveled everything. When I went to Yale in 1960, I really had trouble understanding them, and they had trouble understanding me, even though I didn't have a deep Southern accent. When my brother went 16 years later, he'd grown up on TV. So he spoke like they did. You know, he had a TV accent. And so the very fact that we have television and movies and everything else, which has pretty much leveled a lot of the differences in the North, the South, the East, and the West. There are still differences, as you know, but it's nothing like it used to be. And food differences, music differences, racial differences, they're not nearly as significant as they were 50 years ago, 40 years ago.
When you told your family you're going to Yale, did you get a lot of flack for that? Were they like, why are you going up with those Yankees? Because there still was a lot of animosity between North and South back then.
Well, my father was certainly said, I remember he saying, you're off to a real hotbed of liberalism going to New Haven. And he was worried about it because he certainly thought, and it was true to much extent, that the Ivy League was a lot different, and Ivy League professors were a lot different. But of course, many people in that time thought Yale was conservative compared to what some universities and some sectors of Northern economy or the Northern society were.
Besides the accent, do you remember culturally, like any really big differences between the Northerners and
Yeah,
yourself?
everything. I mean, it's simple. I remember a guy once saying to me, "Oh, it feels like snow." I said, what is he talking about, that it feels like snow? I'd never seen weather like that, you know. The way they dressed, everything. Many of them were much more sophisticated and experienced. Many of them had traveled to Europe or other places. No, they knew about all kind of stuff that I didn't, art, everything. I didn't know much about anything when I got there.
You know, you started on Wall Street, you know, before, you know, Wall Street was the place where everyone went, you know, to make a lot of money and to really push it. I kind of see technology these days as the kind of the place where you go to be kind of the rock star and make these huge multiples, where you could argue that was Wall Street in, say, the 80s or 90s. You know, you've seen it for so many decades. How has Wall Street changed from, say, 70s to 80s to 90s to the noughties?
Well, when I went to, historically, we've had long periods when the financial types were in charge, followed by long periods when the people who produced real goods were in charge, and then the financial types come back. When I was went to Wall Street, and when I was at Oxford in the 60s, it was a backwater. I mean, the New York Stock Exchange, who cared? The big day when the New York Stock Exchange was 3 million shares. I mean, now, that's not even a trade.
Right.
You know, they do that before breakfast. They've already done it all over the world, millions of shares. So it was really a backwater. Nobody wanted to go to Wall Street or the City of London. When I was at Oxford, my professors used to say, "What's wrong with you? I mean, nobody cares about the City of London. It's not significant to even the UK economy. Why are you so interested?" Now, of course, every kid at Oxford wants to start a hedge fund in her dorm room or whatever. So it's all changed dramatically. The 50s and 60s and 70s was a wasteland, and then along came the long bull market, and so we have everybody wanting to go to Wall Street. Although you're right, more and more of them are now trying to go into technology, because many people are starting to understand that the financial community has got problems. In my view, it's a terrible place to go unless you really love it. I mean, if you love finance and it's your passion, then go. I didn't know it was a bad place to go. I just loved it. You know, when I stumbled onto Wall Street, I said, oh my gosh, this is what I want. This is fabulous. I mean, if somebody's taken me aside knowledgeably, said, this is a terrible place to go for a career. But fortunately, nobody told me that, and I probably wouldn't have listened anyway. It is a terrible place to go for a career now, but if you love it, go.
You know, I watched the Asian crisis in like '97. I've seen various emerging market crises when I was in the city, and one thing I noticed was it would always bounce back. You know, and you would always see things bounce back from crises, whether it be a South American country or whether it be Indonesia. But I was wondering, will the city bounce back? Will Wall Street bounce back to those levels in the '90s and the '80s, where the big LBOs?
Not for generations. There are no UK investment banks anymore, or merchant banks. They're all gone. They disappeared. There were some great names once upon a time that they all disappeared. They're either owned by the Germans or the Americans or somebody else. No, the City of London has already lost weight. I mean, the City of London is still important, but it's not British anymore. There are plenty of Brits down there, but no. Great Britain, the UK is a huge debtor nation now, and the debts are getting worse and worse. The North Sea oil is drying up. No, the UK is finished. I don't particularly like saying it because I had a lot of great successes here, but unfortunately, it's finished.
What's your read on technology now? Do you put your money into tech? Would you put your money into tech? When you look at Silicon Valley and the things that come out of there, what's your gut feeling on that?
Well, I don't know enough about technology to give you a decent answer. I don't invest in technology. I periodically do on the short side because I don't understand it, and I really couldn't tell you whether guys are doing great things or not. I certainly see some of the stock prices. I certainly see some of the companies. Amazon has built a gigantic company. They don't make any money, but that's by design. Is that the right way to go? I don't know. You can ask me in 30 years. But I don't buy those stocks mainly because I have no idea. I mean, somebody can come along tomorrow afternoon. Right now, there are probably 3 18-year-olds in a garage somewhere coming up with all sorts of companies that I don't know about, won't understand, and so I try to stay away.
You seem to have kind of a medium-term to long-term perspective on a lot of economic issues. I've heard you on a variety of interviews saying, look, we're going to have booms and busts in every economy, and you have to ride those out. Bankruptcies are good, and it seems like you're always taking a bit more of a longer-sighted view than the latest news report that wants to lambast the ups and downs of the market. Is that fair?
Well, yes, it's true, but it's fair because maybe because I'm lazy. It's easier to invest for the long term than to have to sit and trade in front of a computer. But I've been around long enough, and I've read enough. You know, history is a fabulous teacher about most sectors of the world, of anything. So I know that this has all happened before. I see how it works. I see how it has worked. And it's going to work that way in the future, I assure you. Human beings are still the same. We still put our trousers on one leg at a time. We still get panicked when things go bad. We still get hysterical when things are going right, wildly excited and ecstatic. It's all happened before.
You know, you've written a book called A Gift to My Children, and I believe it's some advice you've kind of decided to pass on to your daughters. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about that. And do you follow the Warren Buffett school of not giving any inheritance to your children?
It's a good question, and I don't know. I'm grappling with it. You know, Warren's kids are old and grown, and it's easier for him to make that kind of decision. My kids are 6 and 10, so. Yes, intellectually, yes. I don't want to give them anything. Educate them, and then okay, now you've got your brains. You're on your own, and teach them all the things to work hard, etc. Yes, that's my view. I notice that Warren has certainly given his kids a lot more over the years, and since they've gotten older, I have no idea how I'm going to do it at the moment. Intellectually, I say don't give them too much, and I haven't given them too much, but. Who knows?
Yeah,
they're kids right now.
It's something to grapple with. Yeah, I guess it's easy for Warren to say because each one of his kids is almost established in their own industries.
Yeah, they each have a lot of money that he's given them over the years, etc. You know, and he's now decided that one of his sons is going to be the chairman of the board of his company.
Right.
So, I mean, that's not what Warren was saying 30 years ago.
What was in the book, A Gift to My Children? What were the themes that you wanted to pass on?
Well, it started because I had these kids. I'd never had kids, so I started thinking of things I wanted to make sure that I taught them, and so I'd write them down. The next thing you knew, I had a magazine article or two. The next thing you know, it became a book of things. I've had plenty of mistakes that I've made. I've had a few triumphs, and I wanted to teach them in a book. I like to teach them, and I do teach them, but you know, if you have a book, it's something they can always pick up one day and look at and say, what did my father teach me about that? Whether I'm alive or not at that time, it's always something they can have it right there. Oh yeah, now I see what he meant. The only way I know to make sure that that's still around always and easily accessible is in a book.
Okay. You retired from Wall Street, quote unquote, in 1980, and it looks like you've taken, you know, breaks from now and then. Did you miss it when you were away from it because you took a big chunk of time off? And did you find that you found things to do, or was it difficult being away from those markets?
Well, I haven't had a job since 1980, but I've had to invest. I mean, how am I going to pay my rent if I don't invest my money somewhere? Even if I just put it in the bank, that's investing and getting the interest. You got to do something with your money. I guess I could turn it over to Sally or Bob, but I got to look after it. And because of the nature of who I am, I mean, if I'm riding around the world and I see great things happening, I could wave and keep going, or I could say, hey, look at that. This is a phenomenal opportunity, and so I can stop and make an investment. So whether I like it or not, I still invest, A, because I have to, and B, because it's still a wonderful, wonderful way to spend your time.
That second trip where you went around the world in your Benz with the trailer on the back, what was the most interesting part of the world at that time? Because you went 10 years later than your original motorcycle trip. What had changed, and what was your favorite part of that trip?
Well,
the
world changed dramatically. Russia was much more open. First time I went around, it was still the Soviet Union. You know, it was a disaster. The second time I went around, it was the Commonwealth of Independent States, or whatever all those countries called themselves at that time. No, huge changes. China, same way. Africa, you know, when I went through Africa the first time, everybody was a socialist or a communist. The second time, nobody wanted to be a communist. Nobody even wanted to be a socialist. If they did, they wanted to be a rich socialist. The Berlin Wall had fallen. All of that would, you know, garbage had been discredited, and everybody knew it. So everybody was trying to open up to the outside world and open their economies, their societies, everything. That was much, much better. Technology, of course. So we had the computers and the internet, which did not exist 10 years. I mean, it existed, but the idea that you could go around the world on a motorcycle with a computer in 1990 wasn't even an idea. It was laughable. So the world had changed and is always changing. One of the things that I write about in my books is no matter what you think is true today, it's not going to be the case in 15 years. You pick any year in history, 1900, 1950, and look at what everybody thought was the way the world is. 15 years later, enormous changes had taken place all over the world, no matter where you're in society, in politics, in wars, economics, everything was enormously different. What is this, 2014? I assure you, 2029, they're going to look back and say, how did they not see that the world was changing and it was going to be different 15 years later?
Does that make you comfortable being a contrarian investor, or because you're talking about investing in Russia when people are like, "That's the last thing"? Does that reassure you when you think about, say, that 15-year time frame?
Well, it may be because I do have experience of seeing how the world has always changed, and I know it's going to change. Now, listen, Russia may be collapsed in the next 15 years. I don't know that it's going to be what I think. It may go through the roof and then collapse. Who knows? But I know that everything we think today is accurate is going to be different 15 years from now. And of course, the key is to make sure you're going the right way instead of the wrong way.
Who do you listen to or watch on Wall Street as far as investment professionals or advisors, or is there anyone that impresses you, or do you keep an eye on?
I'm pretty much a loner. I don't have a TV. I don't pay attention to. I don't speak to other people at all. No, I have found in my life that if I get an investment idea from somebody else, I nearly always lose money, and I'm not quite sure why. So I have learned not to try. If you tell me to buy X, I promise you I'll walk out of here and not think about it another time, because I know that I'm probably going to lose money.
It's interesting because so many of those messages are subliminal, and if you're always constantly, if you're even in a room where the television is on, and at 3 different places you hear there's a crisis, there's a crisis, there's a crisis, all of a sudden you're behaving and investing or not investing like there is a crisis.
Right. No, as I said, I don't have a TV.
And when you look south from the U.S. and you see, say, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, that whole piece, you look at the global economies, is that something you stay away from right now? A lot of commodities being produced in Brazil.
Well, not as on principle. I'd rather look to Asia than to other places. But then, no, I've had African investments. I've had South American investments. At the moment, I'm mainly looking to Asia or to raw material commodities.
Okay, and in Asia, are you still looking at Vietnam and a lot of the Southeast Asia as well, or is it pretty much China where you have your focus?
China, Japan, Singapore. These are places where Australia a little bit, where I have things. I would like to invest in North Korea, but I'm an American, so it's illegal. I'd like to put all of my money into North Korea if I could. North Korea is where China was in 1980, or where Myanmar was in 2010. Very exciting and dramatic changes are taking place, but I'm a citizen of the land of the free, and we're not allowed to invest in North Korea. It's
interesting for me to see a place like North Korea. You talk about this hyper-connected world we're in, where everyone knows everything about everyone else. North Korea seems to be like the last place, and maybe the last place in history, that'll ever be not connected or not developed or not saturated with capital. I mean,
Well, maybe I doubt if it's even going to be the last place, because there are a lot, North Korea has a great gene pool if you look at it historically over the past couple of thousand years. There's something about the Koreans that they're not dumb, unsuccessful people. They're certainly among the most isolated, but even that's changing. That's changing very quickly. The Russians are pouring in, the Chinese are pouring in. I'm sure there must be some countries in the world that are more isolated and backward than North Korea at the moment, but it's changing very quickly.
Yeah. Jim, we always ask people on the program a few questions at the end. I'm going to hit you with these questions. If you can make a phone call to the 20-year-old Jim Rogers, I guess that gentleman was in New Haven maybe at the time, and give him a bit of advice, what would you tell him?
Well, that's interesting, because I had so much fun at Oxford. If I'd been smart when I was 21, I would have gone to China and learned Chinese.
Right.
If I'd been really smart when I was 21. I, like every other 21-year-old, am looking back instead of to the future, and Oxford was Oxford. It still is, but it was, so I went to Oxford. I guess I would tell him, okay, go ahead and go to Oxford and do all that, but then after you get out of Oxford, go to China, as soon as you can. I'm not even sure of that, because I had a lot of fun on Wall Street and a success. And if I'd gone to China when I went to Wall Street, I probably would not have been able to retire when I was 37. But I guess I would say to him, okay, go to Wall Street, have your success, and then go to China, instead of fiddling around in America for the next 30 years.
Right. Well, because investing, sometimes you can have the right investment idea, but you can be in too early or be too late.
Many times.
Right. So maybe going to China in the late 60s was too early.
It would, I would have had to live through the Cultural Revolution. I probably would have been executed. So you're right, it probably would have been too early.
You mentioned retiring when you were 37. What was the response like when your book came out, Investment Biker, and the community and everything? How was that received?
Well, I was surprised at how well received it was. My publisher was publishing Marlon Brando, his biography at the same time.
Okay.
And the publisher, the original publisher, even said, it was a division of Random House, said, I don't want to publish this book. it's not worth publishing after I turned it in and read it. Although her reader thought it was great, but the woman for some reason thought it was useless and a waste and didn't want to bother and wanted to split up in all of her time on Marlon Brando. So another guy, the head of the company, in fact, said, "No, this is a good book. I want to do it." And so Marlon Brando's book sort of disappeared, and my book, became a reasonably successful book, which apparently surprised her anyway, that lady who had her own imprint. And I had no clue. I had no clue how I was going to do. I'd never done a book before. I just wanted somebody to read it and somebody to like it, and they did.
And you wrote it all yourself?
Who else?
Yeah, well,
my mother.
These days, a lot of people have.
No, let me to clarify that. What I do is I dictate the book.
Okay.
And that it started with a magazine article. We dictated a lot, and then another guy came and I dictated and dictated. So we had 2,000 pages, and Random House said, "You're a wonderful person. We ain't gonna publish 2,000 pages." So we had to edit and edit and edit and edit to get it down to a proper book size. But that's how I do it, and people often say, "Gosh, your book sounds just like the way you talk." That's why, because I don't write it. I tell the story, and many people, Southerners especially, historically have been better at telling stories than most other things, and certainly than other people. So I tell the story, and then we transcribe it, and then I edit, somebody else edits, we edit and edit and edit.
Why is it that you Southerners have this charm, this hospitality, and this way of telling stories that the Northerners just don't have? Why? It's not fair.
I don't know if you ever read a story called The Ice Palace by F. Scott Fitzgerald. No. And in there was a Southern girl, and she went to the North and fell for this guy. I think he went to Princeton probably because it was Fitzgerald. And they were all engaged and planning a big wedding, etc. And they had a party, and the Northern family built an ice palace, and everybody was in there having this wonderful party. And after the party, she went to the guy and said, "I'm breaking the engagement. I'm not going to marry you." And the guy said, "Why?" And she said, "I can't live here. Nobody flirts. People are all cold." And I mean, Fitzgerald it was one of his early stories. He said, "But it's all ice. It's all cold. Nobody has joy of living, and nobody will flirt." She said, "None of these guys will flirt with me because I'm engaged to you. And I don't want to live like this. I want to go where people are laughing and giggling and flirtatious." And so she left.
And that describes the South a bit better.
Well, that was F. Scott. As you may know, he married a woman from Montgomery, Montgomery, Alabama. And so I guess he had a lot of insight into Southerners.
Do you ever go back to the South? Ever back to Alabama?
My niece is getting married next month. No, my mother died recently, but I used to certainly go back at least once a year to see her, take pictures with my children of their grandmother. They won't remember her, but at least they'll have lots of photographs. No, we go back.
Just finishing up that advice question, what is the best advice you've ever received across your career? Maybe it be business or maybe it be personal, but does something come to mind?
Well, probably follow the money. By that I mean, if you figure out who's going to make the money or who is making the money, you can pretty much figure out politics, society. You can figure out a lot of stuff. A lot of people, their hidden agenda or their agenda can be discerned and discovered if you really can figure out, okay, who's going to make the money, who is making the money, who's got the money, who wants the money. If you can follow the money, if you can figure out how the money is, what's happening, then you'll figure out a lot of the real stuff that's going on. Forget what the politicians say. That's garbage, as I hope most people know by now. There's a hidden agenda everywhere, and you got to figure that out.
Because ultimately, those political decisions are about some type of money flow going somewhere in the future, whether that be for their reelection campaign or who knows.
The voters want it. The voters will support you. The lobbyists want it. Oh, you just got to figure out who's going to get the money and why. Don't listen to what they say. Don't listen to all their platitudes, either the politicians' platitudes, or the lobbyists, or the interest groups. You know, they're all trying to figure out how to get some of the money.
That's a famous line from the movie about Watergate, when they finally found, the guys and took Nixon down. It was follow the money, right? Because they ultimately traced the money.
I'm not the first person to figure out that you got to follow the money or figure out the money, but yeah, it's been demonstrated many, many, many times in history. Yes.
Interesting. The last part of that question is to the 20-year-old that's listening to us around the world, whether they be in Australia or China or Brazil. What advice do you give to them if they want to?
Well, the same thing. I would say you must spend some time out of your own country, no matter what it is. It's better to learn a language these days, especially in 2014. I would certainly urge you to learn any language. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be Chinese. Learn any language, and certainly to spend some time out of your own country, because you're going to learn a whole lot more about your country, about yourself, especially about yourself if you have to live in a foreign country for a while. So go.
You're going to learn about what you're not good at, what you're good at. You're going to learn more about your personality.
You're going to learn about your own, you're going to learn about life. If you got to go and eat different food, or buy in shops that you've never seen before, or transportation systems that you have no clue about, it's going to make you learn a whole lot more. You're going to become much more self-reliant, that's for sure. And you're going to understand that the world's very different from what you think it is. And that's a very good start.
That's great advice. Jim, what's next for you in the next few years, next 5 years? Is there another book in you? Is there another world tour?
No, I don't think so. Right now, what's in is my two little girls. I was very much against children. I thought children were a horrible waste of time and energy and money. I felt so sorry for people who had children.
I used to feel that way too.
Well,
what changed? What changed with you?
I was never going to do it. What changed me was I had one. And then I said, oh my God, I was wrong. So I found out that I was absolutely, totally, unbelievably, 100% wrong.
You were?
About children. Yeah, absolutely.
And what is the truth about children then?
Children are so much, you learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about life. You learn a lot about other people. It's astonishing how much you learn from. I have emotions I didn't know I had. I understand my parents for the first time in my life. I understand there's this whole class of people out there that I knew nothing about. Parents. I knew nothing about these people called parents. Well, now I understand a lot, and there are a lot of them in the world. So no. My focus now is these two little girls.
It's amazing how when you don't have children, you almost typify parents as almost these, like, not second-class citizens, but these stupid aliens. Like, why would you do that? Why are you showing me pictures of your kids? I don't care.
I don't want to see them. I'd walk to an airport, never see the children. Now when I walk to the airport, I see everybody's children. I'd go by in the park, I'd see parents with their kids. I'd say, those people must be so miserable. Now I see them laughing and smiling and having fun. I see the world much differently now that I've had children.
That's a very good piece of advice. I was definitely like you until a couple years ago, where I kind of got one by proxy. I guess it's empathy, or you see things through their eyes. You forgive your parents for a lot of mistakes they made.
As I say, I've learned a whole lot about myself and about the world from having these little girls.
Right.
So my next 5 years, my next 25, who knows, is devoted to these little girls as long as they'll have. There's going to come a time when they're going to want to have nothing to do with me. I know. But,
that's coming too, right?
Yeah, I know that's coming. And as long as they'll speak to me, I'm going to be with them.
Okay. And in the meantime, you're still going to be talking about the markets. You're going to be investing yourself. If people want to learn more about this index, can you just tell us a little bit more about that and how they can find out more about what you're doing?
Well, I came to the conclusion that the commodity bear market was going to come to an end, and I was about to go off around the world, so I figured I want to invest in commodities, so I'm going to do it. So I decided that I would come up with an index. I could put my money in the index while I was gone, and then if I was right and there was a new bull market, I would make money, and I didn't have to worry too much, and even if I wasn't right, and the worst that would happen, nothing would happen. So, and it turns out that one of the few times in my life I got the timing almost perfectly, and the index, in my view, the bull market in commodities is not over yet, and it's got a few more years, if not more, to go. So this is just a basket of, you know, you can buy the S&P 500 index, and that's just a basket of stocks. Put your money in the basket, and if the prices go up, you make money. If it goes down, you lose money. That's what this commodity index is. It's a basket of commodities, and if they do well, and so far, it's outperformed all the other commodity indexes, because this was for my money.
Right.
You know, the other guys trade against their index. You know, I didn't have any customers. This was for my money. This wasn't for somebody else. So I guess that's one reason it's done better. It's outperformed the others.
It's funny you say it. Like, a lot of guys that used to work on Wall Street don't want their money anywhere near Wall Street traders, because they know, like you said, so guys will trade against the index that they're selling. Is that something you walked away from Wall Street, being hesitant to give your money to?
Well, I've never given my money to anybody else, partially because I know that most people who invest don't do as well as the averages. I mean, I'm not the first person to know that. It's been proven many times by academics and consultants. So I know that most people don't do as well as the indexes. And second, I mean, I think I know a little bit about money. Why would I give it to Joe or Sally when I think I know something, and maybe even more than they do? So no, I'd rather do it myself or put it in an index, which the studies show over and over that the index outperforms 70 or 80% of active money managers year after year after year. I mean, it's a sad commentary, but it's a fact.
And what's the name of your index?
The ROGERS International Commodity Index.
Okay.
There's the ROGERS International Agricultural Index, Metals Index, but you know, the parent is the ROGERS International Commodity Index.
Fantastic. And your website, is it jimrogers.com? That's where all the information
Not
is.
much there. It's jimrogers.com basically is my trip around the world, which is there for historic reasons. My public schedule is there. I got to put it somewhere. That's about all that's there. I mean, there's no blog or anything that I maintain.
Okay, and no more books, no more trips around the world. Maybe till your daughters are growing up, maybe you should take them around the world.
Who knows? Who knows? I never knew I'd do any books. I never knew I'd have any children. I never knew I'd live in Asia. So, you know, I tell you, whatever you think is true, 15 years later, it's going to be enormously different. It's going to be incredibly different. So
fantastic. On that thought, I'm going to end the show. Jim, thanks so much for sitting down with us. It's just a fascinating story, and great to hear your read, you know, on the whole world. So appreciate it. We say on London Real, it's about the journey. I wish you well in yours.
Thank you. It's been fun. Thank you.
All right, take care.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.
This week on London Real, we have the entrepreneur and mentor, Dan Pena.
I'm part Freud, part General Patton, and part Jack Welch. Self-esteem is the key to high performance. You know, we only make changes for two reasons, Brian: desperation or inspiration. You can do anything you want that you have passion for, because that eliminates most of the crap, because most people don't follow their dream. Before I had any money, I used to go to the Rolls-Royce dealers and sit in the cars and smell the leather. Practice success before you're successful.
My audience is either going to love you or hate you. I
Well,
don't know.
what gets measured gets accomplished. Perfection equals paralysis. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Dress British and think Yiddish. If you want to send your kids to a better school, if you want to be able to take care of your mother when she gets dementia, if you want to this all takes money, not Zen.
On Sunday, London Real presents Dan Pena, your first 100 million.
When I see mistakes, if we were at war, we'd all be dead.